The two central themes of Tears of the Kingdom story are sacrifice and community, and these themes are closely intertwined. They are necessary to each other. Communities cannot survive without sacrifice, but also any sacrifice would ultimately be meaningless without a community to sacrifice for. Think about Rauru sacrificing his life to seal Ganondorf long enough for a future hero to arrive, or Princess Zelda's sacrifice to restore the Master Sword. In these examples of sacrifice, characters are sacrificing their lives for people they care about, for their kingdom, for their community. Their sacrifices are meaningful and important, have long-lasting effects, because they are sacrificing for others. As a counterexample, Ganondorf's parallel sacrifice, when he sacrifices his own mind in exchange for personal power, that's a selfish sacrifice. A sacrifice only to benefit himself, and so his sacrifice is ultimately meaningless. It doesn't matter, his influence vanishes from the world. Now imagine that you are a writer, and you want to write a story where your audience really feels the weight of your character's sacrifice. In order to do that, first you need to show them what this sacrifice is for, why it matters. The audience needs to learn about that community that is being saved by the sacrifice. You need to get the audience to care about that community too, to experience what makes that community special, what makes it worth saving. And that's Tears of the Kingdom's entire game, both its main quest lines and nearly every single one of its side quests. Tears of the Kingdom is a game all about community. It's all about these different characters from different races and species, from different cultures, different backgrounds, who have to come together to save their shared community. Of course, in every Zelda game, Link has always gotten a lot of help from others. He's almost never defeated the villain totally on his own, but he's never gotten quite so much help from so many different characters, and that help has never been so necessary as it is in Tears of the Kingdom. The game's theme of sacrifice is mostly told through cutscenes. You watch Rauru make his sacrifice, you watch Zelda make her sacrifice, you watch Ganondorf make his own twisted sacrifice. But the theme of community isn't really told in those cutscenes. Instead, the theme of community is established through the gameplay itself. To be honest, there are a lot of things about Tears of the Kingdom story that I was disappointed by. But one thing I think the game did really well was the harmony between its narrative themes and its gameplay. Breath of the Wild definitely had some ludonarrative dissonance between its story and gameplay. It had this story where Princess Zelda's holy sealing power was waning, and Calamity Ganon was about to break out of his imprisonment, and so the whole world was at the brink of destruction. There was a lot of urgency and even panic within the story, but the gameplay was very relaxing and slow-paced. The gameplay was all about taking your time, exploring, getting creative with the mechanics, and doing whatever you wanted whenever you wanted. That urgent story and relaxed gameplay didn't always feel like they fit together. Tears of the Kingdom is a story about community, and so much of its gameplay is all about community too. There is no dissonance here. But let's talk a little bit more about Breath of the Wild. I think Breath of the Wild was the loneliest of all 3D Zelda games. In every other 3D Zelda game, Link has a partner who accompanies him on his adventures. For example, in Ocarina of Time, you always have Navi the Navigator Fairy with you. Everywhere you go, in the deepest dungeon, out in the open field, while lost in the Syrian desert, you always have this shining floating fairy companion by your side. And more than that, Navi can be very helpful. She'll give you puzzle hints or tell you about a monster's weak points. You're never truly alone. Ocarina of Time is not a lonely game. As another example, in Twilight Princess, you spend the entire game with the mysterious Twilight Realm-born imp Midna, who is a very developed character, with her own backstory and motivations. She goes on an entire arc over the course of the adventure, from a selfish character, who only cares about herself and who's manipulating Link to get what she wants, into a selfless character who cares deeply for the people around her. And you go on that entire character arc with her. She's by your side every step of the way. Twilight Princess is also not a lonely game. Compare these examples with Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild is the first main series 3D Zelda game where Link doesn't have a partner. You spend the majority of the game alone. All those hours you spend freely exploring the wilderness, solving puzzles. You're doing it totally alone in this quiet, barren, ruined, melancholy post-apocalyptic setting. Everywhere you look, you see reminders of what has been lost. Abandoned homes, burned settlements, devastated fortresses. Everywhere you look, you see reminders of how empty this world is and how isolated you are in it. In the main quest line of Breath of the Wild, you will briefly partner with other characters, like Teba of the Rito, who helps you reach the airborne divine beast Va Meadow. But these partnerships never last for more than a couple minutes. As soon as the divine beast is defeated, you're back on your own again. And that fit with the game's narrative themes. Breath of the Wild was a game about tragedy. It was set in this post-apocalyptic world where Hyrulean civilization had nearly been destroyed. The world was depopulated and empty. When I explored the world of that game, the loneliness of the experience matched the tragedy of the setting in a way that made sense. At the opposite end of that spectrum, I think Tears of the Kingdom is easily the least lonely of all Zelda games. You don't just have one partner in this game. After a certain point, you can have 5 different characters running around with you at all times. It can become a very crowded experience. There are so many characters cluttering up the screen that I had to send some of them away. Like there are actually too many partners in this game. I have never felt so surrounded by friends and allies in a Zelda game the way I was in Tears of the Kingdom. And that's community. Link is literally running around the map with his own little community of characters. To dig into that theme more, I want to discuss a couple of the main quest lines in the game, starting with Rito Village. Okay, so when you travel to Rito Village in Tears of the Kingdom, you'll find a village buried beneath ice and snow, a village fighting to survive. Back in Breath of the Wild, there's this side quest in Rito Village that involves gathering these little bird girls together to sing a song to help you find a shrine. It's pretty cute, and it's one of the better and more involved side quests in the game. In Tears of the Kingdom, those little singing bird girls have grown up, and in a time of crisis, they are the ones stepping up to help their village. While the adults are busy searching for food and solutions to the snowy disaster, these bird girls are taking care of their village. This was honestly really exciting for me. When I first saw them, I was like, hey, I know you. I remember you. You're all grown up now, and you're not just useless little pieces of bird crap anymore. You guys are helping out. Good for you. The developers of Tears of the Kingdom are presenting a certain idea of community here, one in which when crisis or disaster strikes, everyone in the community will pitch in and help in order for the group to survive. The central character of the Rito questline is Lurelin, son of the new village elder, a young bird boy prodigy and hothead who thinks he can do everything on his own without help from anybody. However, pretty quickly he learns the errors of his way, that he must rely on others if he wants to succeed, which is of course the central lesson of the entire game's story. This is a lesson Link and the player will eventually have to learn too. Eventually, the game will force you to accept that you need help if you want to overcome the game's challenges. After you meet up with Lurelin, he joins you on your quest. And at first I was like, oh, we're doing the Breath of the Wild thing again. I'm gonna team up with this cutie patootie bird boy for like 5 minutes, and then never see him again, just like the last game. But then this quest line with Lurelin just keeps going and going and going, and the whole time he's there by your side. All of a sudden, the game isn't lonely anymore. Finally, for the first time in over 10 years, since the release of Skyward Sword back in 2011, Link has a partner again. And Lurelin is really useful. He has this wind gust ability that totally transforms how you maneuver the environment. With him by your side, so many places that otherwise would have been difficult to reach are now easily within your grasp. He's also a fantastic archer. In combat, this kid just racks up headshots like nobody's business. He made combat so much more fun. When I reached the end of the Rito questline, I was really sad at first. I assumed this was the end of my journey with Lurelin. My adorable little bird boy bullseye partner had learned he was a sage. And the way sages usually work in Zelda games is that they just sit around in a temple until the very end of the game, when they show up in a cutscene for 2 seconds to help seal away the villain, and I assumed that's what Lurelin was about to do too. But then I was surprised and absolutely delighted when Tulin created this magical clone of himself to accompany me on my adventure. At first I thought this magical clone was just so I could use his gust ability whenever I wanted, but no, it actually walks around with you. It flies in the air with you. When you're in combat, it fights with you. It's not quite the same as actually having the real Tulin with you, but it is the next best thing. I did the Rito questline really early in the game, so I got to have Tulin's spirit clone with me for nearly the entire game, and my experience was way more fun because of it. His abilities in and out of battle are awesome. It's not just good gameplay. By showing you how much more fun the game is to play with Tulin by your side, the game is also showing you how preferable community is to solitude. Next, I want to examine another of the main quest lines in the game. Next, I want to look at the Gerudo questline. Just like the Rito questline, in the Gerudo questline you have a partner. This time it's Riju, the young chief of her people. I thought Riju was the most interesting of the brief partnership characters in Breath of the Wild, but in that game you don't actually get to interact with her very much, and she spends most of the game just sitting in this chair, doing nothing. In Tears of the Kingdom, she adventures alongside you, and just like Tulin, she has an extremely useful ability that transformed how I approach combat. With her, I was raining devastating lightning strikes down on my enemies. I became Thor, god of thunder, striking my enemies down with my electric might. Just like with Tulin, the game is more fun to play with her around. Just like with Tulin, through gameplay, the game was showing me how preferable community is to solitude. But in the Gerudo questline, you work side by side with a lot more characters than just Riju. There's this part where Gerudo Town is under siege by these freakish and physically resilient mummy Gibdo creatures. Link and his allies must defend the town and defeat all of the monsters. It's one of my favorite parts of the game. Of course, Link and Riju work together here, but it's way more than that. You fight alongside the entire Gerudo army. You actually work with them to develop a defense plan. You decide where the cannon will be placed, where the barriers should be erected, where the soldiers should be stationed. And these choices aren't just for fun. They will actually change how the battle plays out. If you don't put the right soldiers in the right places, things will be much more difficult for you. These Gerudo warriors, if placed correctly, can be essential to holding off the hordes of Gibdo, long enough to give you a chance to destroy their spawning nests. This is an entire community working together to save their home. This is an entire community working together with you to help you, as the player, beat the game. It's both really fun to play and narratively compelling. This is Tears of the Kingdom story at its best, when it's telling its story through its excellent gameplay, rather than its often repetitive and exposition-heavy cutscenes. Fast forward to later in the game, and there's this moment when Link is facing Phantom Ganon, and Ganondorf launches this blast of deadly gloom sorcery at Link, the exact same kind of deadly sorcery that nearly killed him in the opening. That shattered the Master Sword in a single hit. But this time Link isn't alone. This time Link has a community. And I'm gonna play just a tiny bit of that cutscene, even though I know some people are annoyed when I play the cutscenes. But I really like this one, so we're gonna watch it.
Link, we are here!
Isn't this so sweet? Doesn't this scene just warm your cold, shriveled, dead heart? At this point in the game, you've spent hours and hours helping each of these characters save their own homes. And now, when you need help, when you need them the most, they leap in at just the right moment to return the favor. I know there's nothing really narratively deep or complex about this moment, but there's something about characters helping each other, fighting for each other, caring for each other, that always hits me a certain way. Like, isn't this the world we wished we lived in? A world where we help each other when we need help? Now, let's fast forward to the final boss fight of the game. Before the final fight, you battle against a horde of monsters once again alongside your friends. It's this ridiculous, over-the-top, messy brawl, with all these combatants piled on top of each other. It's kind of dumb and clunky, but it's also really fun. It's fun to fight alongside those other warriors, and it's something no other Zelda game has really done before. When you actually reach Ganondorf, at first, like every other final boss fight in every other Zelda game, you are facing off against the big bad villain alone. a one-on-one contest between hero and villain. Then you reach the second phase, and Samurai Ganondorf transforms into Demon King Ganondorf, and his health bar goes crazy and he gets way stronger, and he summons a bunch of phantom clones to help him out. And that's when your friends leap in to help you. One by one, the sages enter the battlefield and target one of Ganondorf's phantoms, so you can focus on the big bad himself. This was kind of an extraordinary moment for the Zelda series. The final boss battle becomes this huge brawl where all these different heroes, all your friends and allies are actually fighting the final boss alongside you. And in the fight's final phase, when Ganondorf transforms into the Demon Dragon, Link is only able to defeat it because he has help from Princess Zelda in her Light Dragon form. Of course, Link has had assistance in final boss fights before. For example, in both the Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, Princess Zelda helps out by firing light arrows at Ganondorf. But this final boss fight in Tears of the Kingdom feels different to me. This time, your fellow warriors are actually there in the arena with you. It's not like this is the first time that this has ever happened in a video game. I'm not claiming it's revolutionary from a mechanical perspective. I'm just pointing out how Tears of the Kingdom, more than any other Zelda game before, is about people working together, and how that appears everywhere in the gameplay, including in the final boss fight. Now, let's move away from the main story, because this theme of community doesn't only appear in the main questline. It's all over the entire game. Almost every single side quest in the game also develops the same theme. For example, there are the monster control crews. Early on in the game, while I was exploring around Hyrule, I came across this big group of dudes marching through the countryside, wearing buckets on their heads and wielding sticks. When I spoke to them, they said they were gonna go clear out a monster's nest. And I was like, this is crazy. I've never seen anything like this in a Zelda game before. There's some random little battle about to take place out in the open field. This is cool. So I followed them to the monster camp, and I watched as they charged in with their bucket helmets and their crappy little stick weapons. I hid behind a box so I could observe how it all went down without getting involved myself. I wanted to see how these dorks would do against these monsters. Let's see if they can actually win on their own. And then about a minute into watching this totally embarrassing mess of a fight, I realized I'm doing this wrong. This would obviously be 100 times more fun if I fought with them. And so I leaped out from behind my box and kicked some monster butt. We cleared out that camp together. These monster control crew quests quickly became one of my absolute favorite parts of the game. I loved leading my ragtag band of losers who are just trying their best into battle. It's so much fun, and it's fun specifically because you are fighting with a community. Even in so many of these side activities, Tears of the Kingdom creates engaging gameplay out of spending time with other characters, out of working together. Another of my favorite side quests in the game is in Hateno Village. Back in Breath of the Wild, Hateno Village was the only true surviving fragment of Hyrulean civilization. In a barren and depopulated world, it was one of the few places you could still find life and community. Hateno Village demonstrated what had been lost in the calamity, what was still worth protecting, and also a potential future for the people of Hyrule, where everyone lived like this. In Tears of the Kingdom, Hyrulean civilization has sort of exploded out across the entire map. Hyrule isn't contained to that little corner of Hateno anymore. You can find people all over the place, in Kakariko Village, in Lurelin Village, in Tarrey Town, and Lookout Landing, and all of the stables feel livelier than they were before. You can find travelers and wagons on all the roads. Monster control crews patrol the fields. Everywhere you look, there is life. Hateno Village's role as the last bastion of civilization is irrelevant in this new game. The developers had to find some new role for this settlement. In Tears of the Kingdom, the once peaceful village of Hateno has been sundered by political turmoil. A hotly contested mayoral election rages between CC, an eccentric fashion designer whose gaudy and atrocious mushroom style has transformed the Hyrule fashion scene, and Reed, the homely and backward-thinking bumpkin who adores vegetables and cheese and hates mushroom-themed outfits. It's the political contest of the century, and Link and the innocent citizens of Hateno are caught in the middle. If this were any other game, you'd probably pick a side here. You'd either choose the god Roddy and ridiculous Cece, or the totally boring carrot humper Reed, and then you'd campaign for them amongst the people of Hateno, until your preferred candidate won and the losing candidate was sent home in humiliated tears. But this is Tears of the Kingdom, and this game is all about communities working together, so that can't be how it ends. So of course the two political extremes are reconciled, learn to overcome their differences, recognize each other's strengths, and decide to build a stronger village together. I've seen some people complain about this side quest. I've seen some people say that it's lame that you don't get to pick a side, that it just devolves into a cheesy soap opera about the importance of working together. But I think those people are missing what makes Nintendo and the Zelda series so charming and appealing. These games are charming because it's a setting where everything works out in the end, where different kinds of people do learn to work together, where political drama doesn't tear the fabric of society apart. If you want to see the opposite, just turn on the local news. In many ways, Legend of Zelda is an escape from the real world. The Legend of Zelda shows us a world where community triumphs personal greed. And sure, that's a goofy and cheesy and cartoonish world, but it's still a world a lot of people want to spend time in. The final side quest I want to discuss takes place in Lurelin Village. Back in Breath of the Wild, Lurelin Village was this tiny, cozy, beachside collection of huts, tucked away in the far corner of the map, so small and so out of the way that you could easily miss it entirely. It played no part in the drama of the calamity and the war between good and evil. It felt to me like it was sort of out of reach of the rest of the story. It was an escape even from the escape. But in Tears of the Kingdom, Lurelin Village has not only not escaped from the chaos that's affected the rest of Hyrule, but it has been hit harder than anywhere else. Lurelin Village has been destroyed, invaded by monster pirates, and razed to the ground, its villagers scattered across the kingdom. Almost all of the settlements of Hyrule are facing much more dangerous or more serious crises in Tears of the Kingdom than they were back in Breath of the Wild. For example, in the previous game, the divine beast Va Meadow was just flying around in circles above Rito Village. It wasn't really doing anything to the Rito at all, it just looked sort of menacing. The divine beast Va Naboris was just stomping around in the desert. Sure, it was kicking up a sandstorm, but that sandstorm wasn't really affecting the Gerudo in any particularly terrible way. By comparison, in Tears of the Kingdom, Rito Village is buried beneath snow and ice. Gerudo Town is under siege by monsters, its surface abandoned, under threat of destruction by the Gibdo. This is better storytelling. It raises the stakes. Serious problems are more compelling than minor inconveniences. You get to feel like a real hero when the gameplay allows you to thwart a real threat. Which brings me back to Lurelin Village. You can clear out the monsters and rebuild this village one house at a time. And as you rebuild, the villagers will return. As you rebuild, life returns to this place. Now, Lurelin Village was never nearly as big as Hateno or Kakariko or even Tarrytown, but it still feels really special as you watch it transform from a burnt-out, barren wasteland back into that quiet and peaceful fishing village we knew from the original game. When you finish rebuilding, you are rewarded with this scene where the villagers throw a little celebration. They cook some fish, do a funny dance, and thank you for helping them. And it really is just a little thing. But it feels like the true reward for this quest is the community itself. The true reward is that now there is one more thriving community in the Kingdom of Hyrule, however small. I also want to talk about Lookout Landing. Lookout Landing is the new fort that the people of Hyrule have constructed right in the center of Hyrule Field. Back in Breath of the Wild, Hyrule Field was a total dead zone, the most dangerous place in the entire game, where the artillery laser beam wielding ancient mechanical guardians roamed, vaporizing anyone foolish enough to explore here. There were absolutely no NPCs to be found in Hyrule Field, no life, no community. So I was really excited when I first stumbled upon Lookout Landing. It was satisfying to see that life and community were finally returning to Hyrule Field. that my efforts in the previous game to bring peace to Hyrule were bearing fruit. The kingdom is restoring itself. Lookout Landing itself serves as an excellent example of that theme of community, as it grows and expands over the course of the game. At the start, the fort is only inhabited by Hylians and Sheikah, but as you complete the main questline, it becomes livelier, busier, and more crowded. When you complete the Rito quest, a few Rito begin patrolling the skies above the fort. When you complete the Goron quest, a couple little Goron boys arrive who roll around the camp. Gerudo warriors begin guarding the entrances. At first, this one guy is training all by himself, but after you complete the Zora quest, he has a squad of Zora friends to train alongside. By the end of the game, Lookout Landing has become a miniature version of Hyrule Kingdom, where all the different races are living and working side by side. This new settlement serves as a visual metaphor of the game's themes of community. Now, before I end this video, I want to discuss its themes of sacrifice a little more in depth. There are 3 big sacrifices in the game story: Rauru's sacrifice to seal Ganondorf, Princess Zelda's sacrifice to restore the Master Sword, and Ganondorf's sacrifice for personal power. First, let's watch just a little of Rauru's scene, and as you watch, just try to think a little bit about how the writers are portraying his sacrifice, so that you can contrast it with how Zelda's scene is written later.
Don't be so smug. I know exactly what it will cost me.
Rauru!
Thousands of years will pass in the blink of an eye. You only delay the inevitable.
You're wrong. Years from now, someone will appear with the sword that seals the darkness. A swordsman with the power to defeat you. Link. Remember this name.
When Rauru realizes that he and the sages cannot defeat Ganondorf, he chooses to sacrifice his own life to seal Ganondorf away, to hold him there long enough for Link to arrive, which will take thousands of years. Rauru's own body will serve as the key. He's not just sealing away Ganondorf, he's sealing away himself. This is the end of his life. He will never leave here. Thousands of years later, when Link and Princess Zelda find this place, Rauru's body has almost totally withered away. There isn't even a corpse. All that's left of him is his arm and his magic. And this is kind of an extraordinary decision. Rauru doesn't know Link. He's never met Link. He has no personal experience from which to judge whether Link truly has any chance of defeating Ganondorf. He only knows of Link through Zelda's descriptions of him, and he doesn't even really know how long it will be until Link is born. This is an incredible long shot. This act requires a tremendous amount of faith in a future that Rauru cannot predict. He is sacrificing himself for people he will never know. Those communities we've been discussing, Hateno and Lurelin and Lookout Landing, they only exist because of Rauru's sacrifice here. I started this video by talking about how community and sacrifice are intertwined, and we see that here. Rauru's sacrifice is made meaningful by the communities that grow and flourish through his choice. When Lurelin Village is restored, when the different factions of Hateno reconcile, when Lookout Landing grows into a bustling miniature Hyrule, each of these is a manifestation of Rauru's choice here. Rauru is sacrificing himself for everyone, for the entire kingdom, for generations and generations of people, for his entire community. I think Princess Zelda's sacrifice is a little different. We're gonna watch it, and while you watch this scene, I want us to think about a couple questions. Who is Zelda actually sacrificing for? Is it really for all of Hyrule the way Rauru's was? Or is it for someone much more specific? How are the writers portraying her sacrifice? What emotions do the writers want you to feel when you see her sacrifice? Are there any differences between how her sacrifice is portrayed as compared to Rauru's? Is her sacrifice portrayed as beautiful or as horrific? Alright, let's watch it.
You must. Protect them all!
Princess Zelda is clearly sacrificing her life for the sake of a single person. She is making this sacrifice for Link, so he will have a chance to defeat Ganondorf. She makes it explicit when she says, "Link, I will restore the Master Sword for you." And just before she transforms, she calls out his name. Of course, Rauru also specifically mentions Link when he sacrifices himself too. For a story about community, these cutscenes are awfully focused on a single individual. But Zelda's scene still feels different to me. Her relationship with Link is so much more personal, more intimate. Unlike in Rauru's case, Link isn't just a name to her. She has a relationship with him. He is, at minimum, her closest friend, and probably a lot more than that. Of course, I do understand that through Link she is also sacrificing for everyone else too. She does ask Link to protect them all. If Link succeeds, then everyone will be saved. But still, I think her much more intimate relationship with Link changes how we, as the audience, perceive this sacrifice. Zelda's scene feels different from Rauru's to me in other ways too. Rauru's sacrifice is in the middle of a battle. It's this desperate final attempt to win the fight, to defeat Ganondorf. It's not something he spends a lot of time thinking about. It's not something that's deliberated or agonized over. It's done in the spur of the moment. It's the sacrifice of a warrior. It's the noble sacrifice of a king for his kingdom. Something that never ever happens in real-world monarchies, but something that constantly shows up in stories about them. Zelda's sacrifice is one that was deliberated and agonized over. It's not at all spur of the moment. In some ways, I think her sacrifice takes a great deal more courage. Rauru made his sacrifice when he was being fueled by the adrenaline of battle. Zelda had to think about this for days. She had to walk out onto that platform, knowing with every slow step what was awaiting her. And she's not just sacrificing her life here. She is sacrificing everything. She's sacrificing her mind, her will, and her very humanity. One of those questions I posed before we watched her scene was, is this scene meant to be beautiful or is it meant to seem horrific? And I think the answer is both. It is both beautiful and horrific. I think Zelda appears frightened, anxious, nervous. This isn't something she wants to do, it's something she has to do. There's some body horror here. When the camera zooms in on her eyes and they transform into that bizarre pattern, and they constrict and change color into that inhuman purple. Isn't that sort of horrific? But at the same time, that shockwave of golden light, the swelling music, the dragon's iridescent body rising into the sky, there's beauty here too. The developers want us to see the beauty in this moment, the beauty in her sacrifice. I really do love that shot of her eye welling with one final tear, whether that's meant to be Zelda mourning her lost humanity or shedding the last of her human memories. Either way, there's a great deal of pathos in that tear. Finally, we need to look at Ganondorf's sacrifice too, and so we can see the parallels between Zelda's sacrifice and his. Let's watch just a little of it, and as you watch, think about how his and Zelda's scenes are both the same and how they are different.
My mind, everything. Sacrifice it all to destroy you. And cast this world into eternal night.
In some ways, these two scenes are extremely similar. The way the camera zooms in on his transforming eyes, the shockwave of light, the dragon's body rising into the air, the swelling music, because in some ways Ganondorf is making an identical sacrifice to Zelda's. He too is sacrificing his mind, his will, and his humanity. But unlike her, he's not doing it for anyone but himself. Whatever beauty there may be in his transformation is obscured by his terrible greed and selfishness. Not every sacrifice is made for a community. Many of the sacrifices you make over the course of your life will be for yourself. For your own sake. You will sacrifice your time to make money. You will sacrifice your money for personal pleasure. In real life, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes you are allowed to be selfish. Sometimes it is healthy to take care of yourself. But in this scene, Tears of the Kingdom is portraying sacrifice for self as much uglier and more twisted than sacrifice for community. Beyond this question of selfishness, Ganondorf and Zelda's scenes are different in other ways too. Ganondorf's is a spur-of-the-moment decision, mid-battle, just like Rauru's. The emotions he expresses at this moment are different too. Zelda looked so desperate and frightened by her transformation, but Ganondorf is gleeful. He laughs as he transforms. Unlike her, he cares nothing about his humanity, his mind, or his relationship with others. He truly only cares about power to the disdain of all else. As I already discussed at the start of the video, Ganondorf's sacrifice is ultimately meaningless because he has no community to sacrifice for. We've already seen how the effects of Rauru's sacrifice outlived him for generations. For thousands of years, his sacrifice still lives on in the communities of Hyrule. Because it was selfish, Ganondorf's sacrifice dies with him. His influence in the world vanishes along with his life. To be honest, there are a lot of things about Tears of the Kingdom story that disappointed me. Its plot often felt very thin. Its characters were not as developed as I think a game of this caliber and this quality should be. However, thematic analysis is not necessarily tied to the complexity or depth of the story you are analyzing. I wrote this essay to answer a question. What themes did the writers and developers of Tears of the Kingdom write into their story? What themes did they intend us to find? And how did they intend for us to perceive those themes? And the answer is community and sacrifice. Through the gameplay, the developers wanted us to experience community in a way that no other Zelda game has before. The developers wanted us to feel how much more fun the game is to play when you have Tulin and Riju and the rest with you. How much fun it is to charge into battle with a group of ragtag monster control crew dorks. To fight the final boss with an entire team of heroes by your side. And the writers wanted to show us through these cutscenes how much much more meaningful a sacrifice is when it is made for a community rather than for oneself. How much longer lasting is the influence of Rauru's sacrifice? How much more beautiful and emotionally impactful is Zelda's sacrifice? And in these, regardless of the depth of the rest of the story, the writers and developers succeeded.